When we get to a log check, especially a lot of the log checks that face down so that water could run down in and inside the log, it's usually best to try to fill those. So what we are going to do in preparation for that is push some of this backer rod back into that check.
How far back?
I like to keep it in at least a quarter to almost a half of an inch below the surface. You need to allow enough room for the caulking to fill in over top of it so that the caulk can be flush with the outside edge of the log.
So I'm assuming that it's the same thing with the check as it is with the log, that the inside portion of that has to be clean so that it'll adhere,
Yes.
Same as...
One of the things you'll frequently find with log checks is they can be very, very dirty. They can have a lot of contamination on the insides of them. That's one of the real advantages of cob blasting. When you cob blast a house, then the cob gets in and cleans those inner edges where the caulk needs to stick to. If you haven't cob blasted, it's best to try to get a knife blade or a little scraper of some sort in there and clean at least the outside edges of those where the caulk needs to stick, or you're likely to get a failure. Log checks are tricky also in the aspect on new construction. These have a tendency to really open up a lot wider over the first couple of years. So you need to maintain any of these that you fill and make sure that they haven't opened up wide enough to split the caulking. If they do, it's a relatively easy process to go back over and fix it. But if you caulk a log check and it opens up enough to get a small split, it's actually worse than if you hadn't caulked it to begin with.
Trapped water?
Because water can get trapped behind it then and it won't evaporate out. There's a couple of other types of log checks here that we should discuss. This log check is pretty big in diameter, in width. I can stick my finger up in there. Although this one's facing down and wouldn't have a problem with water running down into it, it is a spiral type, and it has a tendency to spiral up around the log. So on the outer portion of this log, where it carries through to the exterior, then it can have a tendency for water to run into it on the outside and can have an avenue to run through to the inside of the house. So it's fairly important to try to seal these up as well. So I'm going to do the same procedure on this one. That will be putting some backer rod in. Then when we start caulking this wall, we'll fill that full of caulk. The other type is right down here on this log. This is more of an aesthetics issue. Some people don't mind having cracks like this in their logs, and that's more of a rustic type look, while others like a nicer, cleaner finish. So on this particular one, we're going to fill part of that when we do our caulking. And they're difficult because they're a series of small little checks that have these little fingers of wood in between them. So each one of these really needs to have the backer rod pushed in individually. Takes a little bit more time. Real small ones we don't have to worry about, but the larger ones that are about a quarter of an inch or over, I'd suggest to fill with the backer. And that's about all that's going to take. I'll fill this one last one here. So I think now, Debbie, we'll be ready to go on and put the log builder caulking on this wall. So I'll put the standard tip cover back on, replacing that orange cone. And I have a variety of different sizes to choose from. What I typically like to do is go with the size just a little bit smaller than the crack that I'm going to fill. So I'll choose this one for now. If you'd like to take these, thank you. This just screws right into the end, and it operates just the same as we were doing before. I'm going to start off with the spiral check, because that's one that concerns me a lot, to make sure that we're getting sealed up properly to the outside. The procedure on this is to just try to fill this about flush with the outside edge of the log. We've already placed the backer rod in. It gets a little bit tricky where these spiral checks dive back into the line we just got through caulking. Make sure we get that sealed completely. And the tooling process is just to go back with the foam brushes. This could be tooled out with a trowel. Some people even do it with their fingers. And you can get an effective seal that way, making sure that it's sealed against both edges. But usually you can get a little nicer look if you finish it off with the foam brushes. I'm going to try to blend this in on this corner where it dives into the caulk line on the log. And it's real important to work it back and forth and make sure that all the edges are pushed up tight. One spot here I put a little bit too much in. I'm going to scrape that off with the side of this brush. Get my brush in the water bucket. And I'll finish off some of the initial cleaning with the wider foam brush. It'll span that joint. Thank you. And that'll finish up making sure that log check is sealed completely, and will keep air from coming in from the outside. Same procedure applies to doing these others. And this one I'll finish off with this trowel, or at least initially scrape off the edges. Show you a couple of different techniques that can be used. And finish it out with the foam brush. On these, being quick and pushing, if you leave the caulking material recessed just a little bit, and with the foam brushes you can push fairly hard. You'll notice I am kind of making somewhat of a mess on the logs themselves, but that's pretty easy to clean up as long as you get onto it quickly. You can also use the foam brushes for a final last bit of detail cleaning. And then I'll end this up. I'll caulk a little bit of this for you here, and you can see the difference that it makes in just the appearance of that kind of gnarly looking log check. I'm trying to get all of these small little interrelated checks filled independently. Can only do it with this method, really working it in there, if you've got a real good finish on the wood. If this was over bare wood or a finish that didn't have a real nice seal to it, then all of this mess that I'm pushing up against the sides would be really hard to clean off. So that's one big advantage of having a real nice waterproof finish, is it'll allow you to go quicker on sealing up your log checks. Now when this dries, the tan log builder is going to go just a little bit darker. I think you'll find that it's going to blend in real closely, and I think that's a lot nicer, cleaner look, plus it will help seal the house up better. One thing you do want to remember, and I can't emphasize it enough, is especially on the exterior of the house, is to regularly inspect the caulking lines and the log checks and make sure that they haven't opened up. If they do, repair them.